is going on? Brian Carroll here, PowerActStrength.com HQ, coming to you from beautiful Jacksonville, Florida. Today, we are diving into part 5 of the 10-20 Life method. This is 10-20 Life second edition, and we have been going through in the last 4 parts, going through 10-20 Life with the introduction, what 10-20 Life is, what it's not, and then we get into a little bit of the programming principles and such. And now we're going to jump into the different phases of training, the off season and such. So we've talked about what 10-20 Life is, what it's not, talking about what's important in your programming. Now we're rolling into off season and pre-contest. So I'm sure most of you have heard at this point about off-season and pre-contest. Pre-contest is known as the time that a meet is imminent. You might be 10, 15 weeks out from a meet. You switch into pre-contest phase, kind of like in-season training for a team athlete. And the off-season is a time where you get stronger. That's when you work on your weak points, and then the meet is further away from a pre-contest phase. So what we're going to get into now is the off-season and pre-contest and how we're going to contrast them. The biggest difference you're going to find in pre-contest and off-season training is going to be the intensity of your main lifts and the number of sets and reps. The volume is typically going to be a little bit higher in the off-season. It's simple. Intensity, volume, and frequency has to be controlled. When one of those things get out of whack, you can push towards overtraining or injury. So it's always about finding the happy medium of intensity, volume, and frequency. One has to give, otherwise you will fall apart. And it's exactly why I have the 10-20 Life training philosophy. It isn't a coincidence that I use RPE in the off season. Now, RPE is the rate of perceived effort or exertion. This is a sliding scale, 5 to 10, 5 being very easy like a walk, 6 moving more towards a fast walk, 7 being more of a jog, 8 being closer to a run, 9 being just below a run, and 10 is an all-out sprint, meaning a 10, you have no reps left in the tank, 9, you have a couple reps left in the tank, 8, you have probably 3 or so, 7, you have 4, 6, you have 5, so on and so forth. Now, the reason why this is good is because in the off season, I want you to have a time where you're away from only focusing on training. You still need to have a life outside of lifting. It's just not simply possible to be on 365 days out of the year and push, push, push. You have to have times where you back off, you give yourself a break mentally and physically. You give those around you a break mentally and physically. And here's something that a lot of people don't think about. I don't think a lot of people think about how hard it is for your training partners either when you're pushing, when you're grumpy in the gym, when you refuse to miss a training session, or you're difficult to be around because you're on all the supplements and training has been going great or hasn't been going great. So it's also nice for your training partners when you're not 100% locked in and training hard and being a dick to everybody. It's nice to have an out where people can be at training a little less long, have a more of a relaxed atmosphere, work on your weak points, so on and so forth. I give the analogy that a baseball player plays 162 games a year, plus spring training, plus playoffs. They might play, a ton more games than 162 games a year when you consider spring training and playoffs and that type of thing. If they played 324 games a year or 365 games a year, how long do you think these athletes would last in baseball? And that means they would not have an off season, be able to recover, work on their weak points, get stronger, get faster, those type of things. You have to have an off season. So when we compare off season to pre-contest, everything is done as percentages in the pre-contest. That's the way I suggest to do it. Yes, you can do RPE pre-contest and percentages in the off-season, but again, I'm just giving you some tools. Use them how you see fit. for your particular programming needs. But I like to have off-season RPE. Pre-contest, I like to have percentages because pre-contest is where you need to be really focused. Everything needs to be precise and locked in. You need to have everything locked in and you need to be working towards a specific goal. And that's why I like percentages. You've got to dedicate. You've got to dedicate yourself during pre-contest. You've got to get away from distractions. You've got to eliminate them out of your lives. You've got to get to bed on time. You've got to make sacrifices, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But pre-contest is worth all the marbles, as Arnold says in Pumping Iron. Lou's father actually said it. It's for all the marbles, Louie. The right mindset in the off-season is going to be much different than pre-contest. You need to consider having somewhat of a normal life outside of powerlifting. Now, there's no such thing as perfect balance when you're trying to be as strong as absolutely humanly possible. And you need to have time where you give people around you an out, not just your training partners, but your significant others, your career, other hobbies outside of lifting. You're still training during this time. You're just not completely locked in and myopically focused on the training end goal for a pre-contest. You have to have success in other things, in your family, in your careers, because if you don't have success in your career and your family, then they're not going to want to support you. To be great at anything, you're going to have to be a little bit unbalanced. This is part of the type A mindset, the mentality of being obsessive, being a go-getter. It's imprinted on our DNA, some of us. And you don't have to be a one-dimensional derelict. Well, the only thing matters to you is strength training and eating and supplementation and cardio and all that stuff. People who tell you that they have to be only focused on powerlifting are likely not good at anything. Instead, the people who are successful in all aspects of their lives are the ones who figure out how to make this happen and not make excuses all the time. The strong get the job done and their lives don't have to suffer. That's the key. That's a balance you need to find. What's the tipping point where I'm so focused on lifting, so focused on powerlifting that everything else in my life suffers? Or do you pick times in your life where you're really focused on powerlifting and then you scale it back a little bit? You rest, you recover, you have phases of training where you're supposed to be going light, you're supposed to be working on your core, you're supposed to be working on your form. Then you come back to it after you've made these improvements and you start a pre-contest phase. For example, in 2012, I was buying another house and it was conflicting with doing APF seniors in Myrtle Beach. So I decided, instead of doing the meet while I'm in the middle of buying, selling, and moving into another house, I decided that the remodel and such for the new house was going to be too much. Everything involved at the time. I talked to Dave Tate about it, and he gave me profound advice. I was kind of lost as to what to do. My whole life was powerlifting. Even though I had success everywhere in lifting, in life, financially, I was doing good. Powerlifting still meant more to me than just about anything. So Dave Tate told me I had to look at powerlifting the same way NFL football players approach their life and their significant others too. 6 months out of the year, NFL player is 100% committed to their team and their craft. This includes mini camps, this includes volunteer training, this includes the preseason, the regular season, the playoffs, so on and so forth. However, the other 6 months, they're working on their craft, they're getting better, they're traveling, they're spending time with their family. So Dave said, you have to be somewhat of a normal dude in the off season to make up for all the sacrifices that you make in your career or outside of your career if you're playing football, outside of your powerlifting, with your family, with your other hobbies, and financially, obviously. They need something to look forward to. If you have significant others, they need an out where they're not just, oh, here goes another meet prep. Here goes Brian being an a-hole again for the next 12 weeks. It's one of those things that Dave opened my eyes and told me that, hey, your wife does support your cause. She loves to see you succeed in powerlifting, but She doesn't love this powerlifting crap nearly as much as you think she does, and definitely not as much as you love it. And that really opened my eyes. And they need to know that they're going to have an out at some point, that meet prep is going to be over, off season is going to move forward, and then they're going to get you back to where you're not so hot-tempered and distracted and tunnel-visioned. Dave Tate opened my eyes on how this would wear on my wife. Even though she loves me, she still gets sick of it, sick of my attitude. Your significant other wants you to hit your goals, but they don't want you to hit them nearly as bad as you want to hit them. And you need to have times where you're investing back in your relationship so you can make up for how much of a jerk you were to be around. Trust me, I know this. NFL players have a long off season. They absolutely do train their way through it, but most don't hit it hard until they've taken some time off after the season. So even if your body could last year-round, your family and friends won't want to be around you if you're always tunnel vision and focused on your goal of lifting or playing or whatever it may be your goal. So it's not about the long term. It's not about the short term. It's about the long term. What you're doing over years and years. You can't redline it 24/7, 365. We see people that have done that. You see the YouTube, the Instagram of people that redline it. They do circus lifts all the time, and what? 5 years tops, usually 2 to 3 years tops, maybe 5 or 6 years. They break apart and they're done forever. You don't see people having 20-year lifting careers anymore. It's because they have the instant gratification of putting up a video, getting pats on the back. Good job, Larry. Good job, Joe, whoever it may be. Good job, Benny. Good job, Sally. And you get your reward then instead of actually doing it at the meet. So that's one trap that people fall into. I'm going to redline it. I'm going to go hard, go home. Or no, not at all. I'm going to get after it, yada, yada. And then they end up with career-ending injuries just a few years in when they should be having a long career of 10 years or longer, getting better each year and recovering and organizing each offseason and getting better. You got to have big picture thinking. When you're getting ready for a meet, you have to plan accordingly. That's not the time to travel. That's not the time to experiment with new diets and all these different types of things. Use your off season to vacation and travel, experiment with lifting form, experiment with supplementation, experiment with diet. But when it's pre-contest time, your focus has to be on your lifting and taking what you built in the off season and carrying it through and molding it and shaping it so you perform on competition day. That's important. You can take time off from having the bar in the off season on your back, in your hands. You can work dumbbells and kettlebells and those types of things. I like to take 4 or 5 weeks off after a meet where I do hardly anything. I train my core a little bit. I go for walks. I just back off and I really enjoy it. And when I start feeling the need to get back in the gym, that's when I will get back in the gym and not any before. I don't have this hard timeline that I have to get back in the gym and improve on these things just in a couple weeks. I let it marinate. I let it sit for a little while I get multiple opinions on what I did, what I did well, what I didn't do so well, and then I go from there. I never suggest people to make decisions right after their meet. Give it a week or so, because there's a lot of emotions that run high after a meet, good and bad, and you can make silly decisions with that sometimes. So the off season, remember, you're not training heavy. You can't keep 100% of your strength year round. It's not going to happen. Every time you load your body, especially your back, you create micro trauma. So that's why it's good to have deloads, which we'll talk about in a little bit, every 3 to 4 weeks to let your body heal. We have the different training approaches where you squat and deadlift on one day, or you only squat on one day, or you squat, bench, and deadlift on one day, and you do your other assistance moves on the other days, and we'll talk about that soon. But depending on your rate of recovery and how old you are, your lifting age, your biological age, you're going to need to build a program that works for you, not just your best friend, not just your training partners. You can't redline too much, you will blow apart. So keep that in mind. If you're a power lifter, I suggest doing about 2 meets a year. That way it allows you 2 20-week cycles, 10 weeks pre-contest, 10 weeks off-season, 2 times, and then you have 12 weeks to rest and recover where you're not under the gun, and you could just chill for a bit and relax. Be a normal dude for a bit. Go on vacation. Don't worry about going to the gym and making it 100% priority. The 12 weeks off are important, and trust me, in 2008, I did 8 meets during that year. I would not recommend doing that, and I think that led to me having a series of injuries in 2009, where I was greatly injured that year, and that's the time that my back really started to come apart on me, and I didn't adhere to this advice I'm giving to you now. So the next part we're gonna do is the weekly options for programming. I appreciate you checking out this video. Like, share, and subscribe it for me, and we'll see you next time, all right? Bye-bye. Thank you so much for watching today. Please subscribe, like, and share if you enjoyed this video, and have a wonderful day.